Hi, my name is Larry Keller, and I served in the U.S. Navy from 1966 to 1972. I was born in 1945, the month of August, in Findlay, Ohio. My dad was a dairy farmer, so I grew up on a dairy farm. And so I learned about all the hard work that entails on a dairy farm. Well, the mid-1950s, in 1951, we moved from Findlay, Ohio to Bucyrus, Ohio. My dad sold the one farm and bought another one where I grew up. So the one I remember the most, because we moved there when I was 5 years old, is the one in Bucyrus, Ohio. I was in there until we graduated from high school, and then my parents retired and moved to Florida. My father was maybe older than most fathers. He was 51 when I was born, and he was handicapped later on and walked with a cane most of the time. And so on a farm, I took on the responsibility, and I wanted to do a lot of the heavy work for him because it was hard for him to do it. And being on a dairy farm, most people that have lived on a dairy farm know that you work until the job is done, and then you can go home and go in the house and have supper and have the evening. So that was the mentality of a farmer, is to work until sometimes after sunset in order to get the work done. And so that's the work mentality I had throughout my whole life, even today. Work until the job is done, and then I can relax and rest. Well, growing up in that era was a rural community. We were not city folks, so we had all of our neighbors were farmers, and the school that I went to was at that point, it was a one-building school for all 12 grades. And they eventually, soon thereafter, built a new addition onto it, but still, the whole school was 1 through 12. And the high school was 100 kids, to give you an idea. There was 22 in my graduating class, so we knew everybody pretty intimately in the class. And so it was great. I loved the community, the people there, my schoolmates. I was in sports. I loved basketball. I played basketball, and also in the track and field. I didn't really like baseball, probably because I was afraid of the fastballs coming at me because I was nearsighted and I didn't have glasses yet. And so. But I was in track, and as a pole vaulter in track, and then in basketball I lettered in the basketball. I was a guard, and I was a achiever in high school. I was on the had A's and B's in class, and I was on the National Honor Society, and I was had fair projects, and also it's interesting to know that my mechanical ability came from the farm, and because today even I'm a very mechanically aptitude person. I do a lot of my own repairs and things around the house, and that all stemmed from being on the farm, because Dad, he always did that. Anything that needed to be fixed, he did it. He didn't hire someone to come out and do the simple things. It was all done by us. And so graduating from high school, my brother, my older brother, graduated. He went to Ohio State, and he talked me into going to Ohio State also. And so after I graduated from high school, I was the last graduating class from Mount Zion High School until we consolidated into, with 4 other schools, into Winford High School there in Bucyrus. And I was the last graduating class. As a junior, I was the president of my class, and also I was on the committee to help name the new consolidated school, which was Winford high school. Well, a lot of my friends would say that I was ambitious and that I was nice to them, and that I was, I don't know, I was just a good classmate. And I think because I was elected president, I think they looked up to me to a certain point, and that was, but I didn't let it go to my head. I just looked at that as a job I had to do, and so I was in the band. I was in the chorus, singing and then playing tuba in the band, and so I had vocal, instrumental background and sports background, so I kind of was involved in all the things that you do or you can do in high school. I have, like I said, my older brother is 3.5 years older than me. I had a half brother and a half sister. He was actually he was 18 years older than me, and he was actually he was in the Navy at the end of World War II, and so that was one of the reasons I probably joined the Navy, was because that Darrell, my oldest brother, was in the Navy at that point. I probably thought about joining the military in college, because when I was at Ohio State, I was in College of Engineering and then the College of Education, and one of my roommates said that, he says, hey, I just joined the platoon leaders class with the Marine Corps, the PLC program. And he says it's really great, maybe you want to do it too. And I said, oh, okay. So basically when I get out of college, then I would go to officers' school and I would be an officer in the Marine Corps. So I signed up for it, and it's interesting, that was in the fall of '65, and actually I didn't stay at Ohio State. I got transferred to Florida State University in January of '66, because my parents had moved to Florida, and so did my residency. And so they told me that I was going to have to start paying out-of-state fees in January. And I thought, well, that pretty well cuts me out of the college arena here, because I'm putting myself through and I don't have enough savings in order to pay out-of-state fees. So I transferred to Florida State University. And so that's where I went then in January of '66. I went down there. And so the PLC program, the platoon leaders class, I didn't go to any meetings. I didn't really know what I was in, to tell you the truth. It was just seemed like a good idea, and so I went to Florida State, and that thing went. But I didn't stay in school at Florida State. My grades weren't all that great. They were better at Ohio State than they were at Florida State, and so I didn't do very well at all. And so finally, I got a letter from the Marine Corps saying that my involvement in the PLC program is terminated. And then it wasn't long after that I got my 1A classification, my draft notice, that I was to report to the Army Recruiters Station. And this was in the spring of '66. And so I thought, okay, my school is over with. Now it's time to, join the military. So I thought, well, I knew Vietnam was going on at that point, but I didn't really want to go over in the rice paddies over there. So I thought, well, I think I'm going to join the Navy, and because that's what my oldest brother did. And I like the water also. I'd rather be in the water than in rice paddies. And so I went down to my Navy recruiter station, and they're in Fort Pierce, Florida. And I showed him the letter, and he says, oh, that's all right, I'll take care of that. And so here's what you got to do. And he says, what school do you want? And I said, school? I says, I'm tired of school. I've had, 2 years of college, and I don't want to go to school. And he says, well, listen, you got to pick a school, otherwise you're going to be swabbing decks and chipping paint. And I says, oh, okay. Well, so I thought for a minute, and I said, well, maybe electronics school, because I had picked up a little book on electronics from a Radio Shack store at one point, and that seemed interesting. So I said, well, how about electronics then? And he says, well, you got aviation electronics. I said, yep, aviation electronics. And I had like 3 choices, and that was the first one. And I didn't get that because the school was full, but I got my second choice, which is just plain electronics. And so that was my choice. I did a little test. He gave me a test just to make sure that I was smart enough to go into that class, and I passed. And so I walked out of that Navy office in the Navy, and well, I really wasn't sworn in yet, but I was in the Navy and what school I was going to go to, and actually I joined the Navy on my 21st birthday, and it's interesting that a lot of people don't join the Navy at their 21st birthday. And so I know when I went to boot camp, I went to Miami, and they swore me in down there, and then they put me on an airplane to Great Lakes, Illinois, and I got there at, I don't know, it was way early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and got checked into the barracks and all that, and my supervisor was, he was a first-class petty officer. His last name was Freeman. I remember that. And so he nominated me to be the Master at Arms, since I was because I was the oldest one of the bunch. All the other guys in my company were, 17, 18, 19, maybe 20. Not too many of them were 21, maybe 1 or 2. And so he made me Master at Arms, which was basically, I was in charge of the barracks. And I was in charge of the cleanliness of the barracks, and how everything was all the racks were made right, and all the lockers that each guy had, all their clothes had to be folded just perfect and stowed away. And I was in charge of that, and I had to, I don't know what I did to the guys that were not up to par. How I disciplined them, I don't remember that, but I was Master at Arms, and that was interesting. I was and also I had a choice of, I found out that there was a chorus in the boot camp, and it was the Blue Jacket Choir. I could join the Blue Jacket Choir. Well, I sang in high school, in a chorus, and so I thought, yeah, I'd be interested in that. So I went to the tryouts. You got to try out for it. And so here was this retired major who was the director. And so I stood there alone and beside the piano, and he tested me to see if I was good enough to join the choir. And so I was. So I joined, and that was a different company, and it was the company was 945. And we were different than the other companies that had to spend a lot of time on the marching field, marching and doing all this kind of stuff. And instead of doing all that, we went to choir practice and learned songs and all that. We had, I saw just recently a picture of the choir, and I didn't realize that there was that many people. The picture I've got shows there's like 82 guys in the choir. And I just remember it being maybe 50 or something like that. But we would sing in the chapel every Sunday. Every Sunday we would sing, and so I was in church every Sunday, which was I was used to that, because growing up with my mom and dad, we were in church always every Sunday, and so that was just built into my DNA to go to church. And so, but that was, and also we would sing at special functions, and it was I'd call it an a cappella choir. And I have to say that we were really good, only because he demanded it. He was a perfectionist, and to give you an instance, there was a kid that was next, about one row below me, and he was whispering to the guy next to him, and the conductor pointed his finger at him. He says, "Hey, out!" And he gave his thumb like that, and he was out of the choir. He had to leave, and he never came back. And so it was none of this, well, I'll warn you once, and no, there was no warning. But after that, everybody knew that there was no trial period of, well, can I get away with whispering to my buddy? Well, it's in electronics, and I had to choose in electronics, it would either be communication electronics or radar electronics. So then I would be either an ET, that's a designation for electronics technicians, is an ET. So I was either an ETN or an ETR. So I chose the communications route. And but during the school, one of my best buddies, George Dio, I'll never forget that guy's name, and he come to me one day and he says, "Hey Larry," he says, "I just signed up for the nuclear power program." I says, "What?" "Yeah, nuclear power program. It's an awesome. It's a 1-year school. But you have to extend 2 years. But it's a 1-year schooling, and you'll get to go to nuclear power." And I thought, really? And it seemed like a good deal to me. So I went and I signed up for it. I read the literature on it. I said, hey, this is really cool. Well, I was in for 4 years, but so now I extended 2 years for the nuclear power program. So now I was in for 6. And so, but to get in nuclear power school, I had to wait a year. And so after I graduated from electronics school, they sent me on a ship out of Norfolk for a year until the nuclear power school class opened up. They'd have room for me. And so I was down on the USS Wright, which is a communications ship. It was basically a baby aircraft carrier built at the end of World War II. It was maybe 800 and some feet long, and it was a light aircraft, baby aircraft. But what they did was they converted it into what it was a cruiser hull, and they put an antenna deck or a flight deck on it. And but when I got to, they got rid of the airplanes, and is basically a communication ship. And it was really one of 2 presidential command ships. The USS Wright, which is a CC-2, was one, and the Northampton CC-1 was the other presidential command ship, which means that there was a suite on board the ship that the President of the United States could come to, and he could conduct any kind of operations worldwide if he wanted to, right from our ship. And so during war or whatever, there was that place. And I remember going up into the suite to check it out one time, and we only had 3 TV networks back then: ABC, NBC, CBS, and so on. And he had 3 TV screens up there, and that was it. And but it was a interesting ship. We'd go out 2 weeks and then come in 2 weeks. And when we would come in 2 weeks, Northampton would go out for 2 weeks. So there was always one of our ships out to sea. But we're only 2 weeks in and 2 weeks out. So after I was there a year, and then I got orders to go to nuclear power school and in Bainbridge, Maryland. But before I did that, I got married to my high school sweetheart. And so we've been married right now 57 years. And so we got married, and so I got a month off before, I guess it was a month, before I had to go to nuclear power school. Because in the Navy, in the service, you get 1 month a year R&R. And so I got married, and then we got reported to Bainbridge, Maryland. And that was the 6 months there in the first part of nuclear power, which was classroom. And I learned about water chemistry. I learned about meteorology, radiation, and the class, I really enjoyed it. And I think got A's on just about everything. I really enjoyed it. The instructing was very good. And so after that 6 months, then I got transferred to Connecticut, to the actual, where the nuclear power unit was, called NPTU, Nuclear Power Training Unit, in I think Windsor Locks, Connecticut. And I was there for 6 months. And we got a place to live over across the Massachusetts line on the north end of Connecticut. And so I'd drive back and forth every day. And it was interesting. It was 12, you work 12 hours on, and then you're off 12 hours. And you did that for 7 days in a row, and then you're off a day. And then you do that for a week, 2 weeks, and then you're off 2 days. And then you do that for 2 weeks, and then you're off 3 days. And it was all high classified information, so I could not bring any of that stuff home. And so I had to do all my studying there. And so we had big manuals to go through, and then of course we had the prototype. We actually had a nuclear power running system that was basically the back half of a submarine that was just like it is on a submarine, only it was on land. And so that's where we trained in. And all electronics technicians, which is what I was, we were then trained to be reactor operators. We had 3 rates. There was electrician mates, there were machinist mates, and electronics technicians. So all 3 of those were the rates that were in the nuclear power program. And all the ETs were become reactor operators. And so I had to learn to operate a reactor and sit in front of the reactor plant control panel alongside the electrician and the throttleman. And that's exactly the way it was on the submarine too. So we go through all these drills, and we had to learn procedures. What do you do if this happens? What do you do if that happens? And we had to know the theory, we had to know the operations, we had to know all that stuff by heart. So there was a lot to remember in nuclear power to be certified. I was, at that point I wasn't thinking of submarine, even though I think I probably picked up a brochure on it. Because at that point there weren't too many vessels that were nuclear powered. Aircraft carriers was one, and submarines were the other. There was no cruisers, destroyers, or anything like that. They still operated under fuel oil. And so I was either going to go to, I don't know if I had a choice or not, but I ended up on nuclear powered submarine. And really, I really lucked out good, because there's 2 kinds of submarines. One is a fast attack, and another one is a Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine. And so just being married, I was lucked out because I got to go on a Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine, which we nicknamed those boomers. And so fast attack subs, they go out just like aircraft carriers. They go out around the world. They may be gone for 9 months, 10 months. And so if I was on that, I wouldn't see my wife, for almost a year. And so this way, the way it works with boomers is that there's 2 crews on a Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine. There's the gold crew and the blue crew. And I was on the blue crew, and we'd have 3 months out and 3 months in. So we'd alternate with the other crew every 3 months. And so our boat was not in Connecticut, right there at Groton, Connecticut, at the sub base. Our boat was over in Europe at a dock, and we had to fly out to there and relieve the other crew there. And that was one of 2 places, either Rota, Spain, or it was in Scotland. And in Scotland, it was tied up next to a tender. And in Rota, Spain, it was just right up to the dock. And so we'd fly out. The Navy would lease a commercial aircraft. And so all 120, that's pretty much how many of us there were, would get on the one flight, and we'd fly out to Scotland or Spain and relieve the other crew. There was about a week of overlap, and then we would have the boat. And then we would have we'd spend about 2 weeks or so on the boat just to do repairs, make sure everything, we had to calibrate instruments, do all this stuff that before we went out for a test dive. And so that's when we would go out for a test dive. And then that's when everything had to be working right. And that's why we went out on a test drive, was because we wanted to make sure everything is right. Because once we went on patrol, that was it, And so, well, it was a lot different than the surface ship I was on, I can tell you that. The camaraderie and the level of, I'd say, intelligence everything was so much greater than it was on the ship. I'm not trying to put down the shipboard type people, but on the ship there was now and then there would be a fight here and there. On the submarine, in all the 5 patrols I made, there was not one fight, and everybody basically got along with everybody. And so you'd have like I was in engineering because that's where the nuclear power plant is. Everything aft of the reactor compartment where the reactor is. Everything forward of that is basically where the missiles are. And so anything aft of that is all the engineering. Where the turbines are, that's where the shaft to the propeller is, and everything is back there. And so that was my workstation back there in the reactor, behind the reactor. And so, but the life was, we had 18-hour days. I like to point that out, that we didn't have 24-hour days. We had 18-hour days, which was something to get used to, because we would be on watch for 6 hours and then we'd be off 12. And so during those 12 hours, we could sleep, we had to study, we could go watch movies, we could play cards, we could read books, whatever. But it was an 18-hour day. So when you get up in the morning or at night, you didn't know whether it was morning or midnight. And because you would be on 6 on and 12 off. So the next time you wake up, if you smell bacon and eggs, you know it's 6 o'clock in the morning. But if you don't smell bacon and eggs, then you know it's probably midnight or 6 o'clock in the evening type thing. And 18-hour days. We had not too much privacy. The berthing was, our berthing racks were 3 deep. And the bottom rack was probably about maybe 4 inches or so off the deck, and then the middle compartment or middle rack, and then the top rack is just below the pipes above in the overhead. And we all had lockers at the end, and but they were not very big, but we had to put everything we owned in that locker. So we report on board with a sea bag, and everything's in there. Even our cigarettes, if we got cigarettes or whatever, we got to have enough to sustain us. And so it was interesting, and everybody was nice. Everybody was nice, and when you first get on, you're not qualified submarines when you get on there. You're just a newbie, and so when you're not on watch, when you're off watch, you're basically on watch with somebody else that's qualified for that watch station, because as a new person on there, you don't know what to do. You're not qualified submarines, you're not qualified for that watch station, and so you need to learn real quick because they're probably on, maybe instead of 18-hour days, they might be on 12-hour days because you're not qualified yet. And so they're going to be real anxious for you to get qualified. And so when you're not studying and reading the books, then you're going to get hollered at. And you can't but watch the movies until you got qualified. And so we had to qualify. There's 2 things to qualify for. One is qualify submarines, and to get the dolphins, like the dolphin, little one I'm wearing here, and which is a big thing because qualifying submarines, there's over 30 systems that you got to learn on the boat, from firing torpedoes to the nav station to the missile compartment to there's just everything, 30-some systems that you got to know. Most of them you got to be able to draw block diagrams for. You got to know where the valves are, where the circuit breakers are, everywhere in the boat, because they're going to ask you where these are when you go to the petty officer that is going to sign you off on that system. You got to know where all this stuff is, and he's going to, whatever he asks you, then you got to know what it is. And so you're busy going through the books. You're going through the boat trying to figure out where this valve is, where that circuit breaker is, and you got to remember where that is, because when you go to get that system signed off, they're going to ask you all kinds of questions. And if they don't think that you know it all, they're going to say, hey, you need to study some more, and then come back and see me. I think my adaptation to military life was not hard. I was not afraid to take orders, even though I may not like the superior, maybe the chief, that was over me, and but yet whatever he said I had to do. That's just the way the military is. You got to take orders. You got to do them whether you like them or not. And I accepted that. And but there wasn't too many. I can't think of hardly any orders that was given me that I didn't really just test. I didn't like, and so I got along fine with all that. And there may be some parts of the military that's not like that, but I know in boot camp, that's one of the things you got to get over. And they try to break you at that at boot camp. If you can get through boot camp, then you can take orders. Then you can be, because they're going to call you some bad names in boot camp. They're going to make you feel terrible about yourself, and they're going to test you mentality, psychologically. They're going to test you whether you're going to make it or not. And so when I got to the submarine or to the ship I was on, I was okay. I knew that I was going to get orders, and I was going to be able to. I was going to be ordered to do things that I didn't really feel comfortable doing or want to do, but I had to do them anyway. And and of course, you can complain all you want to, but you still got to do your work. Well, it's interesting. First of all, we got on board the submarine. My first entry on a submarine was at night, and walk across the gangway to the boat, which is all black, and of course the night is black. And so you can't see much of anything. And then you walk down to the hatch that goes down into the boat. And so you go down into the boat, and you don't know where anything is. And so you got your sea bag with you. And so they tell you where berthing is. So that's where you're going to throw your sea bag and get stowed away. And but on the boat, it's no, I was never on another submarine. After that, I was on a diesel boat, conventional, for just a tour, and I thought, oh my goodness, this thing is really cramped compared to the nuclear ship I was on, and so I didn't feel cramped at all on the nuclear boat I was on, and because I could reach up and I couldn't even touch the pipes in the ceiling or the overhead. I couldn't. They were up that high. I'm 5'7", and we had some people on there who were 6 foot, 6'2", 6'3", and they didn't have to duck. Of course, go through the watertight door, they had to duck, or you're going to be hurting. And but on the first dive, I didn't. Some people ask me, well, did you feel the pressure differential? Did you have to yawn and clear the? No, I said no. It's not like flying in a commercial aircraft at all. You just go down, and the pressure is the same whether you're at a dock or whether you're 400 feet down. It's the same thing. You don't feel anything, and when you go down and come up, we do it real slow, so you really don't even know there's an angle. Maybe a little bit. You might feel, oh, okay, we're going down. So you just kind of have to brace yourself and know that, so you don't lose your balance. But I didn't have no pressure differential in my ears when we'd go down. Yeah, you can. It's interesting. I didn't have anybody that had a psychological issue as far as going crazy. That's. I don't know if they was able to screen those guys beforehand or not. I had no psychological test before I was on submarines. Actually, I skipped. It's interesting. I went from nuclear power school right to the submarine. I actually skipped sub school there at Groton because they were having some kind of repairs being done there, and so I just skipped it completely. I went right to the boat, and I had no psychological testing. I didn't know how to do damage control on a boat because I didn't go through that all, and but when I was on the boat, they told us, it says when we were going to shore duty, they said, do not eat shellfish, and this was probably this was in Spain, and so I didn't eat like clams and lobster and things like that. So one of the guys in the other crew, the gold crew, did. And he ended up with spinal meningitis, and he ended up dying after they left. the dock. And so they were out to sea, and he died. They couldn't, I mean, that's a fatal issue when you have spinal meningitis. And actually it's recorded even today. I was looking at some old records, and I saw that there was 2 instances, and with the Francis Scott Key, where people had died, and one of them was that one I remember. It was on the Gold crew, but nobody on the Blue crew did that. People would, I don't know, the attitude between the guys is like somebody, you know, there's that terminology, says, oh, you know, you're uptight. Maybe some guys get uptight with somebody else, but there's no fist fight. It's like somehow it's resolved. We were the Fleet Ballistic FBM, they nickname it, FBM submarines with the missiles. Our purpose was to be a deterrent. And we just basically went up into our location of doing figure eights in the ocean was up in the North Atlantic around the Arctic Circle. I got my Blue Nose certification, or I should say initiation, and but just doing figure eights. We were just waiting for the Pentagon to send us a message to fire a missile at our enemy. And of course, this period of time was during the Cold War, and Russia was our enemy of the Cold War. And so I assume, I was not a missile tech, but I bet anything that our missiles were all pointed at some cities in Russia. And so we were just out there as a deterrent. So we always believed that if we fired a missile, we failed our mission. It may sound kind of crazy, but if we fired a missile, Russia would probably see where we are, and they would counter with a missile to destroy us. And of course, one of our missiles, or 2 or 3, would end up in destroying some of their cities, and thus they would be sending missiles to the United States and in destroying some of our cities. And so we were always of the mentality thinking, well, we probably won't have a home to go back to if we fire a missile when it comes to it. And so that was our whole thing about, and were we scared about? No, we weren't. It was just a 18-hour day. We did our 6-hour watches, and we would drink our coffee and stood our watches, and afterwards we would go to a movie or something. But of course, then they did drills. They always wanted to keep us sharp of what we're doing. So they would maybe they scram a reactor, they'd have a flooding drill, or they'd have a fire drill. And so we had procedures that we had to go through to, this is what we're supposed to do. And we were graded on that by the officers, how well we did. And so that was always, you never know when it happened. And I remember on the RPCP, which is the Reactor Plant Control Panel, that's where an RO sits. And I remember just sitting there you're there for 6 hours, and looking at the gauges, and everything is steady state, nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden, boom, the reactor scrams. It's like, oh. Then you tell the officer behind you, says, sir, someone scrammed the reactor, or the reactor just scrammed. And so then we had procedures to do in order to recover from that. And there was a fire drill that says, oh, we get a message up from a call up from the lower level engine room. It says, fire in the lower level engine room. And so then we would have procedures that we'd have to go through in order to counter that. And we were always tested by the XO or the captain or whatever, be standing around watching. And of course, anytime I see them come back into our space, I kind of get nervous, because I think, oh, they're going to do something to test us, right, with some kind of a emergency. We had sonar techs that were our ears, our eyes and ears, when we were underwater. And so we may spend a lot of our time maybe at 300, 400 feet and just doing nothing, just steady state, going about 10 knots, 15 knots, just doing nothing. It gets kind of boring. That's why we do drills and stuff like that. And I remember one time I heard this noise come back on scraping the hull. and it was going back aft, and you could hear it, and you could almost see it above you. And one of the guys says, "Oh, I bet that fisherman's really upset. We just went through his net." And but the sonarmen, I'm sure they knew what other ships were out there or other submarines. One thing we learned was that the United States submarines are the quietest ones in the world. We just knew that, and we just know that, and because of evidence that we have submarines, the fast attack submarines have followed Russian submarines, and the Russians didn't even know we were behind them. And so we're not making a lot of noise, and so we know they don't see us. Well, then there's the fast attack submarines. Now that's a animal of a different color. That is different. They're out there on, they're looking for the enemy, okay, and they're going to be playing what we call cat and mouse with the Russians. And I like to call them Russians because they're the only ones I can think of that would have submarines out there that was counter to ours. And so they would follow them. They would that was their purpose, was not that they were going to destroy anything, but if they had to, they had the power to do that. And I remember coming back to New London, Connecticut, or not. We were driving around the sub base. I saw a fast attack there in the docks, and here the sail was crunched. And I thought, oh, what, he did get too close to a Russian submarine and they collided, or what? And the story was that they hit a whale. Well, I don't think so. I think they got too close to a Russian sub and they collided, and the evidence is in the sail. 72, I got out. I was a second class petty officer. That's an E5, and I turned down going to E6, first class petty officer, because I was thinking about, because I went up, I was actually second class petty officer on the ship out of Norfolk, and I was going up ranks pretty fast, and you can do that in nuclear power. And so, but they said, well, I was thinking about going as far as chief before I get out. And they said, oh no, you got to go 7 years. You got to ship over a year before they'll let you go chief. And I said, really? And I says, okay, but then I'm just going to stay E5, E6, or E5, second class petty officer. So I stayed there until I got out. And but I got out because it's interesting. I've seen some guys, older guys in there that have been on submarines for 15 years, and it's like they can't get off once you're on there. And I knew that. Well, they told me that when I was in nuclear power, that the instructors told us that you guys are getting an education that's worth $250,000, and you're never going to get an education like this anywhere in any college or university. And so they invested a lot into us, and so I knew that being a nuke, I was going to be hard to get it off of a nuke, and I'd be on there. And then I've learned that the divorce rate on submarines like that was 70%. And I thought, I think after this term, I'm going to be done. I knew what I was going to do. I had my mind being in business, and I was actually during on the submarines, my wife and I were in a direct selling business part-time. And so when I was home, we would work the business, and I knew that when I got out of the Navy, we'd be doing that full-time. And so that was what I was going to do business. And some of the guys, the nukes, maybe went to a nuclear power plant commercially, and they were picked up easily by them because they were already trained. And but I didn't want to. I didn't want to look at gauges the rest of my life, And what's going to happen at a power plant, civilian power plant, that it runs at certain power all the time, 24/7. Nothing happens. It's so boring, and I could tell by the boring times on a submarine between drills when nothing's going on. You just drinking coffee and just talking to the guy next to you about all different kinds of things. And so I was looking at business, something more challenging, but But the opportunities back then were not as like they are today. I could have gone into nuclear with that training. I could have gone into working for a subcontractor that provides these systems that are on submarines, nuclear. I could be working with them, and I thought, but I didn't have anybody calling me. I didn't have anybody, wanting to see me, interview, or anything like that. So I just went with what I knew would work, and I wanted my freedom. And so that's what I did.
So you worked in a pharmacy?
No, I worked in as direct sales.
For who?
As a Amway Corporation. And so I learned a lot about setting goals. I learned a lot about sales and working with people and product knowledge. And so building organizations. And so that was where we were. And when I got out of the service, we moved back to Ohio. And we didn't stay in New England, and even though we liked New England, we saw a lot of different states, and but we came back to where our family was, except for Mom and Dad. They were down in Florida, and so we came back to Ohio, and we worked that same business there, and I did other businesses too. Before I moved to Florida 30 years ago, I had a Shell Auto Care service station, and I had that for about 15 years. And again, I told you I was mechanically aptitude from the farm work and also the Navy, that I knew about mechanics, and I always done all the repairs on my own car and stuff. So I learned a lot about oil and gas and the mechanics of how cars are, how they run, and how to fix them. We moved to Florida. Yeah, I thought, I was 49, I think, when we moved to Florida, and I saw a lot of people. They work at a job until they're 65, retire, and they're dead 2 years later. And I was not going to be one of those. I thought, if I'm going to, I want to see the beautiful Florida weather, and I want to see paradise in Florida before I die. And so let's go to Florida now. And we always liked it because we always came to visit Mom and Dad down at Fort Pierce, and always enjoyed the Florida weather. And so we decided after at one point I was ready to sell the station and let's just move. Okay. So we did. And our two girls, I had another daughter after we moved to Ohio. So we have two daughters, and so they were in between boyfriends, and so they came with us. And so they still live down here. We have grandchildren down here, and so we ended up here in Port Charlotte, Fort Pierce, or Punta Gorda. This museum, I started volunteering here about 12, 13 years ago when we were over at the Fisherman's Village, and I enjoyed the camaraderie of the other military vets and the people, and also I was always interested in history, military history, and the wars. My brother, my older brother, got me into reading history books, especially World War II, and so I just had a lot of interest in World War II, and so I see a lot of that at the museum. There was a lot of things about that, and interacting with the other, and just sharing our history with other people. That's what I enjoyed doing, and I just did that, a few hours every week at the museum, at the Fisherman's Village, and then about a year and a half ago, this job opening popped up as to be volunteer coordinator, and I said, if I'm going to have a job with someplace, I'd love to do it there because it won't seem like a job. And so it was a part-time position, and I applied for it, and I got interviewed, and I got it. And I've just been really excited about what we're doing and how this museum has grown in the last actually 7 years. We moved over here in 2018, and so now it's 2025. So the last 7 years, it's just amazing what we've done, going from 800 square feet to 17,000 square feet. And I got to know not just the 3 or 4 guys that I would work with each week, but now I get to know, like 100 guys and gals, and from the flight simulators and also all the different branches. I was never, I never poo-pooed any other service because I was Navy. I just, we were all in the same, we were all doing our job, and whether it be Navy, Army, Air Force, it didn't matter. We were all doing our job, and I always learned from them what they did. That was always interesting. What did you do when you were in the Air Force? And says, well, I was in intelligence, or I was doing this, or I was a pilot, or I was whatever. And I just love that kind of knowledge, and also develop new friends. Well, it's interesting that it is a fact that a lot of young people do not know our military history. I know that for a fact because I was up in the flight simulator helping a young person fly, and actually he was in ROTC, and I was flying this airplane in Hawaii, and I said, we're going to go over to Pearl Harbor, and I said, you know about that, right? And he says, no. I said, you don't know about Pearl Harbor? No. I said, wow, okay. So I told him about Pearl Harbor, right? That it was the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor and sunk 8 of our battleships, and so we're in World War II. That's the beginning of it, and he didn't know that. And so we like to see young people come through here to because our museum is different than it's not just about the Air Force, it's not just about the Navy, like some museums are across the United States. This museum is unique. It's all about the wars. Ever since the American Revolution, it's about all the wars and the different battles and of course a lot of the people that died. It just tells people the cost of freedom, and a lot of people, a lot of blood's been spilled. A lot of people never came back, that they're buried overseas just so that we could be free. As a submariner, I think it's special. The dolphins I wear, it's special. It means something because the work that it took to get the dolphins, it's a lot different than the ship I was on. You go on the ship, you're in a in a department, communications. You're on a radio. I was fixing radios and all that, and I didn't have to qualify anything to be on there for that year. And if I'd have stayed there 5 years, I've gotten off, and I'd just been a electronics technician on a ship out of Norfolk. But on submarines, you are qualified as a submariner. You went through those 30-some systems that you had to know. Let me tell you, you go to a petty officer to get signed off on it. Okay, then after you get that whole section done, then you go to the division officer, and he questions you, and he runs you through the thing, and then he signs you off. Then you go to the captain and the XO, and now you're going to be quizzed on all 30 of those systems, sitting alone like I'm sitting right here right now, and they're sitting on this table across from you, asking you anything they want to ask you. And I remember the 3 months that my first 3 months I was studying this. My goal was to be qualified submarines by the end of that 3 months. And so I was working like crazy to study and all this. And I go up to the board, and I go through the oral board. It's not a written test, it's an oral board. And I was there, and I got turned down. I says, oh crap, And I wanted to do it. So it looks like I'm going to have to finish it next patrol. And but it's just, and once you get the dolphins, it's special. One thing I miss is I don't know, I guess it's just the atmosphere. You're there with a bunch of guys, and I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to put, would I like to go back for one day? Yes, I would. I'd go back one day just to look around and get the feel for what it was back then. And but do I miss it? No, but I think about it now and then, especially working here at the museum and wearing my dolphins, and I do think about it, and thinking about how that I could maybe help the museum make the submarine display stand out a little bit better, and maybe I can show people more about what the submarines is like, and I think that should other young people follow my footsteps? No, they can, but everybody's got choices in life, and I made my choices. Could I have made different choices? Yes, I could have, but I made these choices, and I feel good about my choices. And but I hope other people, especially young people that maybe see this or hear this, would excel, do better, do more than I was able to do. And in just the 6 years that I was in, and maybe they stay in for the 20, I don't know. But anyway, it's an education. The military service is an education, and you learn, what keeps this country free, and that's a big part. And so it makes you patriotic. It makes you proud to be an American.